2019 Council work session, and we have a full and interesting agenda ahead of us today. So to kick us off on discussion of the regulation of natural gas, turn it over to Ethan.
Good afternoon, Mayor and City Councilors. Ethan Nelson, I'm the Intergovernmental Relations Manager, and we've got a good amount of discussion today, and I will be at the table for most of it. Today, we've got regulation of natural gas work session as item 1, and then as well, we're going to jump on into a climate action plan update and a gap strategy for item 2. They kind of overlap, and so there will be some stuff that comes up in the first item that will overlap into the second, and it will reference in the second as well. And so hopefully we'll be able to keep clear. And I do want to recognize the tremendous effort and interest on the part of community members and staff to get us to this point. It's been a lot of work. This is including the Sustainability Commission, members of which are here, 350 Eugene, former staff and budget committee members. We've got representatives from Northwest Natural, eWeb, and so I think that there's a broad interest in the topics that we'll be discussing today and providing the information. And as I said, this is a long journey. We've got difficult work. But the good news is we have a strong history of actions and investments in this community. We have a committed community, and we are in a strong position related to other communities in regards to where we go from here. So today, moving on into today's work session, item 1, just kind of give a little bit of a background. So in the fall of 2018, Council approved a work session poll on potential ways to regulate natural gas use in Eugene. The poll referenced a June 2018 memo from the Sustainability Commission Committee on Northwest Natural Gas Franchise Agreement Review. And then also subsequent to the June memo, Council received another memo from the Sustainability Commission that included specific policy recommendations regarding renewal of Northwest Natural Gas's franchise. Both memos included questions related to the city's authority to regulate natural gas within the franchise or by other council action. So that's kind of where all of that information is coming from. And before the 2018 work session on Northwest Natural Gas Franchise Agreement, Council received a tiered franchise system recommendation. And so this work session is in response to that council work poll and then the questions and the policy recommendations that came out of that work poll. So we're providing this information and hopefully with a good amount of depth so that you can get on into a good discussion. To preface just kind of what we did between all of those polls and the information, and this is staff from the Sustainability Office, myself, and also City Attorney's Office. Staff analyzed the Oregon statute that's referenced here regarding whether the city will need to file the proposed regulations or franchise agreement with the PUC, Public Utilities Commission, before the regulation agreement goes into effect. We have sought input from the PUC regarding this column and are waiting to hear back, yet we think it's likely that the PUC won't provide any feedback regarding these ideas. For some of the items, our thoughts about whether PUC has a statutory role, and that's going to be in the notice column in the item that we sent out to you, and we'll get into a little bit later. It'll depend on details that weren't provided to us. For example, we said no for a PUC notice for item 4 that you'll see soon enough, that prohibits incentives for installing natural gas service. But the answer really depends on the type of investments being prohibited. If the investments are part of the rate structure approved by the PUC, then the PUC would absolutely be involved. So we want to recognize that there's some caveats and some assumptions in here that will likely kind of flex. Additionally, city staff's analysis regarding whether the particular or proposal or idea could be a term of the franchise agreement if council so desired, recognizing that in addition to including items within the franchise, there are other vehicles for action, such as a memorandum of understanding, so similar to the City of Portland, which Northwest Natural has provided and can be part of a future discussion, or actions within the CAP 2.0, the Climate Action Plan update. Additionally, the city contractor Good Company provided estimates that were performed as a unique look at suggested approaches to reduce fossil fuel natural gas consumption and its related greenhouse gas impacts. These results should be considered a sense of scale. And what's really critical here is that there's not really a lot of methodology out there for Good Company to go and pull off the shelf and then figure on out how to get hard numbers for what those questions included. So we want to make sure that you understand that as we work through these efforts. And the estimates are there to support decision-making or discussions. Additionally, we're going to have future meetings. You'll have lots of time and additional opportunities to discuss, get more information for decision-making. And so upcoming, on February 11th, we'll have a joint elected official meeting with the EWEB board. And we are wrapping up the AIS and materials for that in cooperation with EWEB, and we'll have that on out by the end of this week. After council break, the council meeting to give specific instructions on the franchise agreement. In spring, there will be additional work sessions that we're working with, scheduling with Northwest Natural Gas to come and talk about their low carbon pathway. And then we'll also have additional CAP 2.0 work sessions to provide direction on plan adoption and or action strategies. So.
Work sessions with the council.
Yes, yes. When I say work sessions, those are similar to this. Before we dive into this effort, we want to recognize the efforts and input that Matt McCray and Josh Scove put into evaluating the current chart and their work to propose additional TBL considerations. These were emailed to you yesterday, and after a cursory review by staff, we think that they would be good additions to this work. And so we find them complementary, and want to just make sure that we recognize their effort and the information that you received. So what we'd like to do is just kind of walk through these really at a high level, and then be able to come back and you ask questions. And so we've got basically about 11, I think, items that we can walk through and talk about. And if you want us to walk through them all first, or do you want to go through them one by one? What's going to work best, I think? Mayor?
First. Yeah, let's walk through.
Okay, great.
I agree. Let's walk through them.
Okay. So the first one is limit or prohibit new.
Could someone move the board? It's cutting off the bottom of the.
Oh, sure.
Thanks.
We may use that board in a little while. We're going to use the board. It was a Herculean effort to get it down here. Even if it's just to put an X on it. Or a smiley face. So limiting or prohibiting new natural gas infrastructure, does it require PUC notice? And Catherine will jump in at any time if she to give us additional information. No, it does not require that. Is it permissible within the franchise? Yes. And then the impact that we see, and so once again, within the document that I sent out earlier with assumptions, there's a lot of kind of the evaluation had a whole set of assumptions, and what Good Company said is they said, well, if we look at what it would, if you're not extending service, what would that look like to start to reduce the number of accounts? And so basically, what would you see in lack of growth of new accounts and new infrastructure based upon what has been the past kind of growth rate in natural gas use in the community? And so they looked at it and said, okay, if there's a 50% reduction in both investment or accounts, and so you'll see this one come up a little bit later, right, basically about 20,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. If there's a 100% reduction, there would be about 40,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. As a sense of scale, we're looking at roughly the full load of natural gas use by 2030 projected on out is equivalent to about 310,000 tons of CO2 equivalent. And so these are just trying to put it into scale for you as you think through this. In regards to triple bottom line, moderate impact on construction costs, which we may or may not be the case. We're kind of working through that. And it depends on if it's applied to new accounts or to the extension of a new pipeline. Number two, require Northwest Natural Gas to incentivize customers, reduce use in natural gas. customers' purchase of emissions offset provided by Northwest Natural Gas Smart Energy Program. So yes, require PUC notice in the franchise. This one was fairly easy to model because we looked at it from just the purchase of offsets. And so at 50% of natural gas use within the community of an offset, then you would see about 160,000 metric tons reduction. If you look to offset the entire thing, it would be about 310,000 metric tons. So you can offset the entire natural gas load within our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. It would increase the cost of the product. We've got some costs that we can share when we get into the next round with a cap. We've got some cost estimates associated with these items. And generally, utility rate increases disproportionately impact lower income populations. So we're just trying to give a sense of scale in regards to an equity impact on the triple bottom line. If you look at the regulation, the purchase and installation of natural gas fuel appliances does not require a PUC notice. We could do that through regulation rather than the franchise agreement. Roughly, this is about 130,000 metric tons of CO2 that would be saved. And the way that we look at that was really to say, what would be as equipment, natural gas equipment becomes obsolete, kind of end of life of a piece of equipment. When do you replace it? And if you replace it, do you replace it with natural gas or you replace it with electricity? And so what are the rates on that and how would you look at, and when things come on up for their useful life? And so there's, once again, variables in there that could get adjusted, dialed up or down. But this was an estimate the good company provided us. Moderate to low impact on low-income populations until the time of equipment replacement, and then it could be pretty substantial because you'd have to buy new equipment and also kind of have that process. Prohibit the financial incentives for installing natural gas. Similar above, no PUC notice. Could be in the franchise. Once again, it was not modeled due to lack of data and complexity. We think that there would be a low impact on low income populations. Same for the next one, prohibit financial incentives, for purchasing natural gas appliances. No notice to PUC, and it could be in regulation and not modeled due to lack of data and complexity. Number 6, prohibit the installation of natural gas service for new residential, commercial, and/or industrial buildings. We believe that we would need to notice PUC. It could be part of the franchise, and once again, this goes back to a similar methodology as number 1, and we believe that there to be that 20,000 to 40,000 metric ton saving. Without increased incentives on the electricity side, it could increase the cost of construction, and also the cost of energy without a price on carbon will be greater than the current rates. Once again, these are assumptions, and they can be worked at greater detail. Number 7, require Northwest Natural Gas to fuel switch to biogas and renewable hydrogen. And we asked them, and we asked Good Company to dial it between 25 and 50%. And when they got back to us, they said, well, the Department of Energy has run an assessment that said that the technical feasibility in the state, and this is technical feasibility, is really at the level of about 22% of the ability for biomethane to be added to the fuel mix. And so we kept the 25%, and this 80,000 metric tons is at the far end of technical feasibility for incorporating on into a kind of a renewable gas portion of the natural gas system. There could be a low to moderate impact on low-income populations. It would likely increase in customer rates to accommodate the new infrastructure and potential increase in energy source costs. So they would be building new biogas plants or expanding existing ones. Number 8, increase the franchise fee and dedicate the franchise fee funds to implementing a program that provides incentives to switch from renewable gas to renewable. No need to notice the PUC. It could be included in the franchise, and once again, not modeled due to the lack of data and incentive program. We think that if it happened, there would be low to moderate impact on low-income populations. Likely increased fee would be passed on 100% to consumers. Impact is based on the size of the fee increase. Number 9, reduce the term of the franchise from 20 years to at most 10 years. So there's no need to notice the PUC. It could be part of the franchise agreement. There's no discernible GHG impact on that, and we don't know if there would be any equity impact on that item. For number 10, and this is comes from, we made sure to incorporate, so we'd have a comprehensive list for you, the items from Josh Scove and Matt McRae. Create a hybrid franchise fee structure with a fixed portion and 2, a variable fee based on a carbon footprint of the natural gas delivered to the community. For instance, a lower carbon gas, then a lower variable. This would not require PUC notice. It could be incorporated into the franchise. And we, once again, utilize the biomethane process there to say at the high end, 25% biomethane by 2030, 80,000 metric tons. Once again, low to moderate impact on low-income populations. The increased franchise fee would be passed through to consumers. Impact would be from an increase in customer rates to accommodate for new infrastructure and potential increases in energy source costs. And then the last one is going to be, again, from Mr. Scove and Mr. McRae. Provide or prohibit the expansion of natural gas services unless Northwest Natural Gas can demonstrate plan to decarbonize its product. And so that's does not require PUC notice. It could be included in the franchise. It was not modeled, but we believe it to be similar to the number 1 on your table. And then, once again, assumptions regarding the impact on new construction. And with that, we've got questions. And if Catherine's got something.
So I'll jump in real quick. Just so you kind of high level of how this, you'll see how this largely broke down based on the statute and the conversation we had back in November, which when you see whether it even could be in the franchise, those are going to be the provisions and the ideas that are entirely within the confines of the 2 people relationships, the City of Eugene and Northwest Natural Gas. Anything that goes beyond that relationship can't be in the franchise agreement because it's a contract between 2 people. So you'll see that as a common theme. And then whether or not, and this was not a simple task because there's just not a whole lot of law out there, largely none. We're looking at the statute of whether we would need to file it with PUC, either the franchise or the regulation before it went into effect. And if it relates to the management of our right-of-way, that is fairly clearly our authority. Once you go beyond that, that's when it starts to get more questionable of whether you'd need to file it with the PUC. When it comes to something that is attempting to regulate or impact Northwest Natural Gas's rates or fees that they charge their customers or the type of service that they provide, the type of product, that's when the statute requires filing with the PUC. So those are the themes you're going to see based on those first 2 columns in this chart.
Okay. Thank you very much for distilling a lot of information in a very discrete form. And I have Alan first and then Mike. And anybody else ready to be in the queue? Okay, take it away, Alan.
Yeah, as many of you know, I am employed as Oregon Department of Energy Assistant Director. And while Oregon Department of Energy, ODO, does not directly regulate Northwest Natural Gas, in my role as the Assistant Director, I do have an administrative interest in the regulation of Northwest Natural Gas. I checked with the City Attorney about whether that creates an actual or a potential conflict of interest, and she informed me that for a conflict of interest to exist, a financial benefit or detriment would need or could occur to me, my private business, or ODO, and neither of us could see how that would actually occur. So I don't believe there is a conflict of interest here, but but as a result of that, in abundance of caution, I want to declare at the beginning of this meeting that at most I would have a potential conflict of interest, but I still intend to participate fully as a member of the City Council in this conversation and moving us forward.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. Item number 6, please. Could you throw that back up there? Okay. As I'm reading this, well, first of all, let me say in a larger sense, or I guess ask the question. It seems to me, or it occurs to me, that all of the impact pieces in the farthest right column seem to have been done, and the one in the middle there, seem to have been done with a static model rather than a dynamic one. So in other words, assuming that assuming that consumers have the choice between gas and electric, what happens when you do this in the marketplace of here are your choices. But it seemed to be analyzing that based on electricity and its current pricing being static. So my question is, am I reading that wrong or am I right? Because it would be my sense that the more natural gas is limited, the higher the price of electricity will go. Especially because we exist in a larger market than just the city of Eugene. I read recently, and I don't have a citation for this, but I read recently that 70% of the electricity that we use in Lane County is hydro generated, where it's 40% in the state of Oregon is hydro generated, and 28% in the Pacific Northwest. So to the degree that we're demanding more power, we're forcing the reality that more gas-generated power in other parts of the Pacific Northwest will be created and increase the cost, and or the increased demand will have a price on the cost, especially with BPA and new contracts needing to be done in a few years here. So first, my question, was this analyzed in a static environment or a dynamic one?
Councilor Clark, I would respond to that. I don't know if there's a static or a dynamic. The way that I would respond is that there's a number of assumptions that go on into this, and they can be tweaked. They can be dialed up, down. They can have a different approach. And so I think that with that said, we could come back and review those and update them. I'd also say that the science and art of energy forecasting is a deep and somewhat dark art, and there's a lot of people that do really good work on that, and I'm not one of those.
But we're going to be asked to make some decisions, yes or no,
I understand
that are going to have an impact on a lot of people. So I want to make sure that the information we're relying on isn't a good guess, but more specific, or I at least want to understand how we arrived at some of the assumptions involved in what's informing those decisions. Another couple of things real quickly. The mayor's going to have a consortium of folks, a summit on being prepared for Cascadia. And I think that's incredibly wise. One of the things we don't talk about is resiliency of source and what will be our effect if we diminish the availability and the supply of natural gas. What will be our energy resiliency as a community as a result? And then lastly, with 1 second, the idea that, well, that's good enough for now. If I want to, I'll go a second round.
Okay, great. All right, Jennifer.
Yeah, would it be accurate to say you're looking for which of these to look for more information on? Would that be an accurate statement for right now? What you're looking for?
This work session was at the request of council and staff. We presented information, and I think it's kind of up to you.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm the most helpful. So
What I would also, just real briefly, I don't think we're asking you to pick and choose at this moment. If any comments on any of them will help as we move forward, and if you choose to pick and choose, that would be fine, but we're not asking you to narrow these down.
All right, I just want to see where we are. It seems obvious that we can't continue business as usual in our city, and we're really trying to meet these climate goals. So the ones on here that I really like are the ones that encourage us to use more renewable natural gas. I think that's something that would be worth our time and effort to look into. And even though it's restricted to the 22%, which I appreciate you getting that back because I didn't know that, so that was nice to hear. I really thought the one that, I guess this is, which number is it? This number 10, I think, is very interesting, where the concept of the fee being based on that concept, so that as Northwest Natural Gas is able to increase their renewable natural gas lowers the price and therefore gets us what we're looking for overall. And I do like the idea of being able to use some of those increased funds to make a difference for our low-income residents who might want to insulate their homes better or switch to natural gas. So I think those things are all worth pursuing. I do want to agree, though, a little bit with Mike with resiliency. I was at a meeting, and eWeb was there, and they did mention that having that backup of natural gas for resiliency was something that they saw as part of their business plan. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And I think that is all I have for right now. Thank you.
Right, Chris?
Thank you. Very interesting presentation. Just clarification for me and maybe for others here. When you look at a chart up there and you see 80,000 metric tons, is that 80,000 metric tons of flow, consumption, emission into the atmosphere? You know, what is that 80,000 metric tons?
Councilor Pryor, it's meant to be 80,000 or metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions, and the way that the unit is a metric ton of CO2 of carbon dioxide equivalent, and so everything gets kind of translated into that. And methane, CH4, is about 24 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, and so that's why it's important to kind of translate it on into these equivalents for metric tons. And so those numbers would be the forecasted annual savings within the community if those actions were put into place. Our best guess.
So that would be the amount not released into the atmosphere.
Correct.
So the second question is, the amount that's released into the atmosphere, is the bulk of that, or do you have figures in terms of the percent of what percent of that is just through the natural burning of the natural gas versus how much of that is from leakage from the infrastructure?
Councilor Pryor, I think that the methodology accounts for leakage and also combustion, is my understanding when working with good companies, that they utilize some models that have that built on into their the calculations.
But you don't know what percent of each is?
No.
Okay. I don't know, it would be interesting to know how much of that is from consumption and how much is from leakage. I'd like to know what the infrastructure impacts are for that. Thank you.
Hey, Greg?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Ethan, I want to go back to number 7, which is the switch over to biogas and renewable hydrogen. Can you tell me, or do you have an idea, what is the cost of retrofitting that infrastructure to do that? 1, 2, what would be the time period if we move forward with that would entail in terms of doing that conversion? And 3, it says, low to moderate impact on low-income populations, but it would have a direct impact on current consumers of Northwest natural gas. And so what would be the average increase in rates for Northwest natural gas consumers for that retrofitting and moving to those two, pieces of infrastructure?
So, okay. In regards to the cost of biogas, and so 2 things that I'll preface this with. One is that more than likely these would be questions that Northwest Natural would love to answer and engage you on at a future work session that, once again, we had said we're preparing for in the spring. So they could talk about their low carbon pathway, and they're the ones making a lot of investments, and so they should be able to have some of that capital construction cost and everything. Additionally, they have been working in partnership with the City of Portland and with the City of Eugene through our involvement in the Metropolitan Wastewater Management Commission. And so MWMC runs the River Avenue wastewater treatment plant, which has digesters there, so biodigesters that take organic material and turn it on into a sludge that goes out to our poplar farm and then produces natural gas or a renewable natural gas before then releasing water back on into the Willamette at specified, safe levels. And so I think that we could reach on out to talk to our partners at MWMC, who I think are in the process of working to create a partnership with Northwest Natural to expand natural gas. And so I think Councilor Ye are you on MWM? So Councilor Ye may have more information on that. In regards to the time period, and so I'm not sure what the costs are. It's substantial. It's not multi-million-dollar, but it's millions of dollars for a lot of times for these infrastructure upgrades. In terms of the time period, I think that in anywhere from a year, depending upon where those are in contract negotiations, to out to 5 years. And so I think the focus is on trying to estimate where we would be in 11 years in 2030. And then once again, I defer to Northwest Natural in regards to what they believe would be costs. And as a regulated public utility, investor-owned utility, they would need to present those if they were going to increase rates to the Public Utility Commission to request rate increases. And so that would be, knowledge that would be in the public sector as well, in the public sphere.
Hey, Claire?
Thank you. Well, thank you, Ethan, for this presentation. It's some very technical information, and going to get into some more in the next part too. So I appreciate how you've broken it out. I was curious, and you did say it was a very, maybe a speculative assumption, but what the basis for believing there might be increased construction cost by prohibiting new natural gas hookups to new construction in the city.
Yeah, and Councilor Syrett, thank you for bringing that up. And that was my thinking, and so I could take full credit for that in regards to its benefit or its lack of accuracy. What I was basing it on, though, was that in a lot of the CAP 2.0 meetings where we were meeting with large level shareholders and also industry experts, what we were hearing was that the installation of natural gas right now into new construction as an energy source is less costly than putting in for electric service and heat pumps. That could be completely erroneous, and it's something that we could dive deeper into to do a much more comparative analysis. And we can reach on out to Northwest Natural and eWeb to be able to get an understanding of what a typical house construction and the cost for those energy systems would be.
So it may be a function of our particular the requirements that eWeb has versus if they were a sub-customer or an EPUD customer, the cost might be different between those customer bases all doing electricity?
The cost of electricity across those different utilities would probably be a little bit different. The cost of new construction would what the increase or the decrease would more than likely be based upon what incentives are available. And so both from the natural gas side and from the utility side.
So there's a number of different factors. It's not just a blanket assumption about what it costs to install natural gas versus an electrical system. It has to do with the particulars of the entities that are being worked with. And
that's my sense. And again, if that's something that you want us to dig deeper into, we can do that. It's not a inconsequential amount of work, but we could get it done.
I wouldn't say to dig into that just yet. Like Councilor Ye, I agree with many of Councilor Ye's comments, including that I think we're obviously on or past the cusp of needing to rethink how we consume energy in our community. And I am a Northwest Natural Gas customer myself. I'm also an eWeb customer, so I think in some ways I exemplify a typical customer. I'm not low or moderate income, so I would say, not just for a personal reason, but just as a policy reason, for me, this isn't about trying to increase rates on natural gas customers so much that they all want to quit and go to electricity, but to really look how we can catalyze moving our community off of fossil fuels as quickly as possible. But we need to recognize as we do that, some of what we want to implement will likely result in higher costs for people. So one of the things I'm going to be looking for in terms of policy is that we are really keeping our eye on the social equity piece and seeking ways to either reimburse folks of low and moderate income who see a harsh financial impact, or in some other ways mitigate that impact on our most vulnerable members of our community as we do this really important work. Thinking to the Yellow Vest protests in France, which was, initiated by a hike in gas taxes. There were many other complicated reasons why those protests went on, but that was a piece there, so we need to be mindful of that. Thanks for now.
Okay, Betty.
Thank you. First, how much do we know about the pollution caused by using natural gas? Something I don't know about.
Yeah, for the purposes of this work session, we really focused in on greenhouse gases, and I think in terms of air pollution, we would want to reach on out to our partners at El Rapa to understand the impact of natural gas combustion in our airshed.
Well, I'm on the El Rapa board. I'll ask at the next meeting.
Awesome.
So number 4, there are several I had questions about. Let's see, number 4 was, if we prohibited financial incentives for installing natural gas, that wouldn't do any harm to anyone, would it? It sounds like something we could do that wouldn't be harmful.
So I think the answer, and this is part of the struggle we had for both modeling the good company and also answering these with just a simple yes or no. It depends on what the incentive is that we would be prohibiting. If the incentive was a set of steak knives, then it doesn't get to the rate structure, it doesn't get to the fees that are being charged. If the incentives, and these are the kind of things that if there are ones that you want us to go down, we'd have to look at all of this. But if the incentives are actually built into the rate structure and the fees that are approved by the PUC, that is an entirely different path that we would have to take, because when it comes to rate and fees, the PUC has been fairly clear that that is their lane. And so the type of incentive that we are seeking to prohibit really matters in answering that question. Mm-hmm. And the information that we were responding to just didn't include those types of details.
Thank you. Number 9 is the next one I wanted to ask about. Reduce the terms of the franchise, the length of the franchise. Is there any possible bad effects from that?
The only one I can see, and that is 100% within your purview, you as the council approve this franchise agreement, it is 100% your authority to set the term. The only negative would be your and staff's time. I mean, that's really it, the negotiation of the franchise agreement, but when it comes to negative impacts to customers, no.
It would be maybe 10 years instead of 20.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be a big, it sounds, that sounds to me like something reasonable in case things have changed greatly in the next 10 years.
The only thing I wouldn't know this for sure is I don't know how far out Northwest Natural plans their infrastructure. And so sometimes with utilities and others, they may have a 20 or 25-year horizon for the installation of infrastructure. And so the uncertainty of 20 years of an agreement may impact that. I don't know that for sure. So that may be one piece of that equation.
Well, I think one thing I think is really important is to let the public know that we're not thinking of making people give up their natural gas. And I think some people think, If that's true, is it that we're not thinking about that?
And what I would suggest is that that's all part of where the council needs to eventually decide on what you want to do. We're not recommending one thing or another at this moment.
Well-
Eventually, the council is going to have to make some policy decisions around.
I don't
all
think
those
we could tell you to people, get rid of your natural gas furnace. Well, I would assume they're not thinking about that. And I think some people are afraid that we might be, a few people think we might be telling them they can't do it. And other people who want to get natural gas are afraid we'll say they can't get it, I guess. We could limit the new infrastructure if we chose to, right? Yes.
We get to manage our right-of-way. So that is someplace that we have clear authority. That is what our franchise is about, is use of the city's right-of-way.
And the fact of putting in the infrastructure does add to the carbon footprint, I assume. So that is more than just the use of the gas. Okay, thank you. That's all for now.
Emily?
Thank you. Thank you for this report. I really appreciate staff, and I think that they didn't get enough time to give us a full enough report. Just getting it yesterday made it really hard on them, but also on council and the public to not have much time to study this and react. It's complicated. I think it would have been okay to put this session off a couple of weeks, and so we could have worked with more information from the get-go rather than having to put it all on another work session. I agree with Jennifer with what she likes. I would really like to encourage moving towards renewable natural gas. I also like the idea of a variable rate, which would encourage us to use less and would also encourage natural gas, Northwest Natural, to get more renewable. And I also like using any increased funds to help lower income people with their energy problems. I really worry about anything that's regressive. I am both an e-web and a natural gas user, and I am low income. So the things that are regressive are going to affect me, not that I'm, the reason why, but I represent a lot of people who are low income. And I'm also like to say I don't like offsets. I think they're silly. I think we need to concentrate on here. And yes, I want more trees everywhere, but I pay for the offsets with natural gas, even though I can't afford it because I think it's important, but I don't agree with it as a way to control this. I'm really looking forward to more analysis of the triple bottom line. That's been a guiding principle in every single blue sheet I get. It talks about TBL. I don't think we had enough time to research that. I'm not interested in pursuing choices that no counselor is showing any interest in. I'm not interested in offsets, and I'm not interested in regressive stuff. Do we have any financial incentives from Northwest Now to increase our gas usage or infrastructure? Anybody know if there are any incentives? There are some, because, getting rid of them if we don't have any doesn't make sense to me. I'm fine with having a 10-year agreement because many things are changing fast in the climate. Unfortunately. So we might have different parameters that we want to look at, but if Northwest Natural's on a 20-year cycle and there's nothing we can do, that might be problematic. That's it for now. Thank you so much.
Okay, Alan?
The incentives aren't to increase, but they're for high efficiency appliances.
Okay, but
So if you get a high efficiency fireplace, for instance, or a stove or something like that, you get a rebate. Thanks for that presentation. Ethan, I guess I get to add dark arts to my resume. Thanks for that. Just a little context. We're talking about thousands. Overall, there's over 50 million metric tons generated of greenhouse gases in Oregon every year. So this is, there's a lot of work to be done with a lot of little things. This is, I didn't want to disappoint Mike. So there's a lot of little things that add up to a lot. So these are the silver buckshot that add up to making a big difference. It's not necessarily so that adding more electricity actually increases the price. There's lots of factors that go into that. If the electricity being used, for instance, for electrification of cars is used in off-peak periods, it could actually benefit the utilities. And the price of electricity, I think if you excluded inflation over the last decade, has actually remained almost the same, pretty close. My comments actually relate to approach rather than the specific ideas. We have a lot of work to do here in meeting our CRO goals and very limited resources to do this work, and it'll take some time to do it. And natural gas is one part of this. Initially, we should be working cooperatively with our large level stakeholders that we have. And I recently talked to Northwest Natural Gas on this topic, and if you followed utilities and franchise fees, i.e. Comcast, and their long-term lawsuit with us, you can know that utilities for franchise fees want to keep them constrained, and they fight hard to make sure that that happens, and that's likely to occur with Northwest Natural Gas. So if we were to work through cooperative agreements rather than adversarial approaches, which this could potentially be, I think we would be better served. Northwest Natural Gas is not going to like putting this into the franchise fee agreements. And we could achieve our goals and likely have a big fight on our hands and take a lot more time. And those franchise fee agreements are set a precedence for every franchise fee agreement they have in the state of Oregon. So it's not a small deal to them. A more fruitful approach, and I think a faster approach to achieve what we want would probably be through a mutual agreement. A bilateral agreement between the city of Eugene and Northwest Natural Gas. We can get those big bang things that that reduce greenhouse gases, and we should be working on the ones that are easy, that we don't involve lawsuits and PUC dockets and doing all this stuff that could muck it up. So I think we'd get a lot, and we'd take a lot of financial resources, legal resources, and staff resources to potentially do. Northwest Natural's done a lot in this. They're the national leader in the decarbonization study that we're going to see coming up, and one of the first in the country to do this. They proposed the renewable natural gas bill today. You're prohibited from actually investing in renewable natural gas by law in the state of Oregon. They are. But if we had a mutually agreed to bilateral agreement, that we could put RNG in there, we could put the decarbonization stuff in there, we could put energy efficiency in there, we could put other ideas that reduce consumption, therefore greenhouse gases, and have an accountability mechanism and a timeline in it, and come to a mutual agreement on that. And they said they'd be willing to work with us on that kind of stuff. So I'd be much more interested in doing that than using the franchise fee agreements, which I think is a potentially doable but a harder way to accomplish this stuff. So that's my, and they did a similar thing with Portland. Maybe you can talk about the Portland MOU that they have.
Yep, Catherine. Yeah,
It's the one from 1996 or so, the older one. I'm not aware of a more recent one.
Yeah, not this one, but.
We can certainly provide that to you. It's fairly short. I would guess that what would be now would be much different and more robust.
Yeah.
And have more, it was fairly general, I would say that,
Short.
in short.
But that's a different way to go. I think a better way for us to approach this than the franchise fee agreement.
Thank you. I have 3 counselors in the queue for a second round, but I just wanted to jump in for a minute. I also met with the Northwest Natural folks, and I do think that coming work session with them will help us frame this, as those decisions are also tied to the conversation we have with eWeb around what their capacity is and how they're projecting the future in terms of their renewable resources as well. So I'm also wanting us to look at these two things very much together as part of the CRO. And also, I think looking at the things that we can do relatively smoothly in that way with a franchise agreement and a bilateral agreement, as opposed to the things that will take us a longer time or sort of are a harder lift. I am interested in the no new fossil fuels infrastructure question, just in terms of the way Portland did it, in which they basically said they didn't want to build the big transport fossil fuels, but they were not restricting the use of the residential and commercial access to fossil fuels. And so as we play out how the renewables work I think that will be interesting to explore the permutations that we could look at. So with that said, I have Mike, then Claire, then Emily.
Thank you, Mayor. I would call it a win. I would think it's a good thing if everybody in town drove an electric car. I think that'd be awesome. I'd like to see that. I'd do it. That's a part of, or at least a big part of why I put those questions made the motion to put those into the TSP. I think it's a great idea. When and if that ever occurs, the demand will double or better for power. So again, I'm just saying this in advance of our work with eWeb, and because I happen to see that there's an eWeb official in the room, I would really, really, really like to know what is the size of the pipe, what is the maximum capacity of power that may flow to residences in Eugene. So if we doubled our demand, can we meet it? No. What's the infrastructure necessary in order to be able to do that? All the questions that come with it. And here's the other piece, because when we're talking about Lane County, let's say, for example, getting 70% of its power from hydro, if we did double our demand and we're at capacity, let's just say hypothetically, that would mean then that we're getting 35% of our power supply from hydro from that point forward. And we would have to have it generated by some other means. So it's really important to me that we see all the dynamic pieces of this. That's what I was talking about, Alan. That if we say, for example, double our electric demand and the rest of the power in order to meet it has to be generated by burning natural gas, then how have we helped with the efficiency and the use of gas at that point? We haven't, is my point. And I would prefer to make sure we're doing this, planning for it dynamically and intelligently. The one other piece was something that was mentioned to us in public testimony the other night, that in doing that, if you're using natural gas to create electricity, there's loss that takes place in that creation, whereas if you're burning it directly, there is not. And there's then more CO2 put into the atmosphere as a result. So I too would rather see us, in a general sense, work harder to decarbonize our transportation than our homes as a goal, if that's what we're trying to do. I think it makes a lot more sense. So, thank you.
Claire.
Thank you. So I guess one thing I'd say is to keep in mind that there are more sources of energy besides hydropower and fossil fuels. So with these dry, sunny winters we've been having, I think our solar energy resources might become more into play going forward. So I do think we would benefit by having our contractor, Good Company, at the table for a future work session, Ethan, since there are some technical questions we've asked that you're going to have to back and ask them. So if that's possible. I'd also like to see the current Portland MOU or any other relevant program they have regarding their natural gas infrastructure. And so we might be challenged to prohibit incentives, but we could provide incentives ourselves for people to switch from fossil fuel to renewables as one of our policy pieces. And because we have a particular relationship with eWeb as our public utility that's chartered by the city, perhaps we could leverage that relationship for that policy in some way. I really appreciate the additional ideas offered by Matt McCray and Josh Scove, and I thank you for including them in our information today. I also, as Councilor Ye and I think Councilor Semple pointed out, I like the idea of the combo, number 10, a fixed fee and then a variable for meeting certain goals. And while I tend to agree somewhat with Councilor Semple about offsets not being such a great way to go, I could see us using them in combination with other policy pieces until renewable sources are more viable than they are right now. So, kind of a pathway towards that. Because right now, my understanding is renewable natural gas in particular is pretty limited in its current efficacy. So, and then to Councilor Zelenko's comments, I would actually be okay with coming up with some kind of binding MOU with Northwest Natural to do some of this work without attaching it to the franchise agreement, but that agreement is a way that we currently have leverage. So it makes total sense to me that we initiated this work session by looking at that franchise agreement as a mechanism for getting at some of the goals we want. And if there's another mechanism to have them come to some kind of binding understanding of what they will do to support us in reaching our goals, I am happy to do it in that framework.
Emily.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Alan, for telling me about the incentives. I think it's fine to have incentives if they go towards more increased stoves and furnaces and everything. And I would not like to do anything about people who have natural gas and their stove breaks. You know, now they have to get EWEB because they can't buy a new stove. How about we help them buy a better stove? I also agree that every single bit counts. But I wonder if this is the first place to put so much energy, because our cars are the very worst part. And please, let's work together with natural gas and EWEB as very much as we can. Our success will be so much better if both sides find things that we can do that will make a real difference. And I think we should also recognize the work that Northwest Natural Gas is already doing to get to more renewable methods. And I'm wondering if we do this work together and make mutually agreeable changes, probably we're still going to have to do some things in the franchise agreement. I don't think we're ready to just go, yes, same franchise agreement as before, but I'd love to make it less aggressively punitive. And a good point, Mike, about the capability of EWEB to continue to be able to supply what we need. This is really important work. I appreciate everybody's input. But let's remember, we've got a huge picture here.
Alan?
Yeah, Claire, good point. The franchise fee discussion actually has paved the way, laid the groundwork for having a conversation about using doing a mutually agreeable agreement, bilateral agreement. So it brought Northwest to the table. So in that sense, it's a very fruitful conversation to have. But not always the initial idea is the best idea. I think shifting gears to an agreement would be better. I'm wondering if we couldn't have the deep decarbonization workshop with Northwest Natural before the break instead of after the break. I wonder if there's a space to do that. Seems more timely than pushing it all the way out to spring. And that lays good groundwork. Mike, on your comment about electrification for electric vehicles, actually, if you do, most electric vehicles, and Jennifer knows this, are actually charged during the evening, and if they could actually use off-peak power, which is better utilization of existing resources that don't necessarily need to add new resources, and while it could potentially add new requirements, nowhere near double. It's like in the single double digits at all over a period of a long, long time. And studies have been done, and we can show that it's very doable and possible to do it. And additional resources, as Claire said, can be renewables, and they can be batteries, and they can be energy storage. And California has put in place and determined that it's doable and cost effective to actually have 100% of their electricity come from renewables by within I think by 2050. So in regard to offsets, I know the skepticism about offsets, but offsets, if regulated properly, can be done very well. An analogy is when EWEB wanted to reduce their electric consumption to not have to build new power resources, they relied on energy efficiency. Well, they did, in essence, an offset when they pay us to go do our energy efficiency reduction, they didn't directly reduce it. They paid us to do it. And by doing weatherization of our windows, insulation, all these different things, they pay us to do it. And that is essentially an electric offset for energy efficiency. Paying someone else to get to the same goal, which is the reduction of greenhouse gases, is what an offset is, and that's the same thing. So offsets can be very, very fruitful, and in the electric utility industry, they've been extremely effective. Conservation is now the second largest resource in the Pacific Northwest, behind hydro. So they can achieve the same goals as moving forward.
Okay, Mike, do you have just a quick one? Because, all right.
Remind me the consequences of not coming to agreement with Northwest Natural?
That's not a really quick answer. That hasn't happened. We've always been able
Right.
to reach an agreement.
What happens if?
There's provisions, and I don't have the franchise agreement in front of me. There's provisions regarding timelines for removal of their infrastructure and things like that. So, the consequences of entering into another 20-year, or 10-year, there's a bunch of different.
If they just said, no, thanks, we're not going to make a deal with you.
Legally, we can tell them to remove their infrastructure from our right-of-way.
But they get to provide it even if it's not in our right-of-way, isn't that correct? If they can find another way to do it?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is a natural segue on to the climate action plan because it's knitted into it, so I
Great.
will let you.
And I think, sure. Ooh, come on over. Thanks. You could take one, pass those around. These are, apologize for the kind of shifting of gears here. Christy Hammett's joining us. John's leaving. We've got a handout, which is our PowerPoint presentation slides, and Mark Nystrom, our climate analyst, is here. He's Chelsea gave. Oh wait, that's one of my things I'm going to give later. I can't spoil it. I slipped up. Spoiler alert. And so we're going to go through this. I really want to recognize that both of these work sessions probably could be 90 minutes each. And so what we're going to do is we're going to walk through and you'll have time for a little bit of questions, but more than likely you're going to want to probably schedule another work session for us to come back and spend some more time. This is a lot of information, and I've only given you, I've got 3 versions. There's the 3-page, the 7-page, and the 15-page. And we've given you the 3-page. We'll get to the 7-page soon. So, thank you. As you can see, the City Council has continually set the tone and vision for local climate action over the past decade. And you have also supported the widespread engagement on this topic with a number of system-level organizations, the Eugene Climate Collaborative, to create a collective impact model that has the City of Eugene as the backbone for ongoing community-wide collaborations. This word cloud from the ECC executive meeting highlights the vision for our climate work to support a livable and equitable Eugene. I know people don't like word clouds, but livable and equitable. Livable and equitable. And vibrant. And within this project charter was a clear commitment to equity. Again, Council's vision has guided our work to be innovative and leading edge as we pull together a community equity panel to provide input into this work and also create a template for community planning projects into the future. Yesterday, January 30th, was the first convening of the equity panel, and it was very successful, and we're looking forward to hosting the rest of them through the next couple months. And in a recent email from Chelsea Clinton, now the spoiler, who shepherded baby Oliver into the world this Sunday, 9 pounds, 10 ounces, she was relieved to be moving forward. You were able to see comparison on total greenhouse gas emissions from our community using both a sector-based and a consumption-based model. And so you can see on the left-hand side, Eugene's sector-based, and then on the right-hand side, Eugene's consumption-based compared to the sector-based from these other communities. And we'll get into a little bit more on that in a bit. And Eugene has a clean energy economy, which is the legacy from a century of progressive public policies and investments. When we voted to create a public utility of water and electric, it allowed us to be able to access our Bonneville Power Administration when it was built in the 30s through the Works Project Administration. And we rank low on our per capita sector-based emissions compared to other U.S. cities as well. We are leaders in this work and continue to set the bar for local government and community action regarding climate change. Our goals in alignment are exceeding those of other leading communities. And we are the only city represented to base goals on a consumption-based methodology. And this is a segue to our CRO goals. Throughout today, we will continue to focus on these two CRO adopted goals, the Climate Recovery Ordinance goals, and pathways to reach these outcomes. And that's the 50% reduction of fossil fuels by 2030 and the 7.6% annual reduction from 2016 levels. For the GAP strategy, which we have talked about, it is important to separate those two buckets most within our scope of control, that are within the sector-based approach, versus the broader consumption-based approach. We track and report on both, yet we have more opportunities for direct action within the transportation and buildings buckets. Another way to look at our goals is by nesting them within their relative GHG greenhouse gas impact within the community and how we account for these within our inventories. And so you can see we've got a fossil fuel reduction, and then there's the opportunity around reducing our sector-based emissions, and then the larger challenge of reducing our consumption-based. Before we jump into the gaps, it is important to recognize the planning and investments that have been made to date, and we will continue to need to be fully implemented to reach the levels of greenhouse gas and fossil fuel reductions that have been estimated. And this is not just the City of Eugene, it is actions that are being taken by partners across the community, including the ECC member organization and other groups providing input to inform this work. We received the 350 Eugene's action priorities for the City of Eugene Climate Action Plan on Monday night. After an initial review, there is roughly 75 to 80% overlap on the what actions should be pursuing that are included within existing programs, the CAP 2.0 recommendations, and the GAP strategy. The area that will need additional work is going to be on the how to achieve that what. We will continue to work with our community partners throughout this process and into the future and appreciate their efforts to help guide us. Addressing the gap. So this is just a disclaimer. It says departure from the original project plan. And so when we presented the CAP 2.0 project plan, we did not have this gaps piece in there. And so these items, no ECC members have committed to completing or funding the following actions. So for clarity, our projected gap, and this is for our in our sector area, is on the left-hand side, you see our sector-based emissions, which is roughly just over 1 million tons of GHGs annually. Our climate recovery ordinance goal is to get those down to about 360,000 metric tons, and that's that bottom line, that dashed green line at the bottom. The second column is the business as usual, BAU, increases to be about another 140,000 tons. So the total by 2030 is we're projecting out to be about 1.1 million metric tons of GHGs. The CAP 2.0 reductions, and that includes modeling associated with Envision Eugene, with EWEB's plans, with our transportation system plan, and other community-wide investments, will roughly drop that amount in the sector-based emissions, which is really kind of roughly the transportation and the buildings, down to about 320,000. We'll reduce that amount. So we've got a gap there on the right of about 450,000 tons. And so that's kind of what our goal is. When we start to look through these gap strategy, keep in mind that our target is to reduce 450,000 per year. So this is the work that I sent on out to you, and this is the 3-pager. This is the teaspoon, not the tablespoon. And so we kind of worked through this. So a couple items, more aggressive TSP goals. Well, LCOG did some modeling for us, and it incorporated in things such as some what-if scenarios, including parking management policies to increase coverage and costs, increased transportation option programs, local fuel tax increases, increase in transit service miles, as well as policies to increase walking and bicycling. And those can range how much more aggressive we want to be than what our existing TSP is. We can net another 30 to 70,000 metric tons annually of reduction. If we start to look then and we say beyond what is modeled within the TSP, we want to, as Councilor Clark said, focusing on the transportation sector. Well, we just did some high-level numbers. If there was an additional transfer of fossil fuel vehicles out of the fleet and into electric vehicles, 25,000 of those, we'd have an annual savings of 110,000 tons. 50,000 vehicles, 220,000 tons. And 75,000 vehicles, 300,000 tons. So just a caveat here is that when you have your joint elected official meeting with EWEB, you will also hear about what the tolerances are, because I know our colleague in the audience from EWEB might be looking at 75,000 new automobiles, a load of that, and be saying we might not be able to meet that, or there would be some concerns on that. So that's further discussion. The increase of low-carbon fuels, and also advocate for more aggressive federal vehicle fuel economy standards. Those are all modeled within the TSP already, and so one of the things that is interesting is the aggressive fuel economy standards. The Obama-era fuel economy standards, the CAFE standards, were what was modeled in the TSP, and those are currently being rolled back by the current administration. So, and in regards to cost, once again, we're still in the process of developing a lot of this, and we can dig deeper and do more modeling, more assumptions. One of the things that we looked at is that for electrification in passenger vehicles, over the life of that vehicle, if you have an electric vehicle versus a fossil fuel vehicle, a gas or diesel, you're going to save roughly $9,000 over the life of that vehicle in costs. Next is then more sector-based items, is that energy used in buildings. So these are the numbers that we pulled from the Northwest Natural items, and so I'm going to kind of jump over those because we looked at those just previously in the work session, but there are the numbers around transferring on electric gas systems to electricity, reducing the carbon intensity of the gas, that would be the biomethane, purchasing offsets, and then this item of regulating infrastructure. We also included the home energy policy, home energy score policy, as per your interest, to have that bundled and looked at, and so that's there. And then other items that don't fall necessarily within a car or a building, or automobile or a building. The Oregon cap and trade legislation, once again, we'll have a discussion of that at a February 11th meeting with EWEB's, my colleague Jason Huser, relating to the likelihood and the mechanisms which are going to be in that bill this year. But roughly estimated that could have an impact of about a saving of 430,000 metric tons annually within this community. Another big one is refrigerant offsets, and so as I'd said with methane, it's a much more potent greenhouse gas. Well, refrigerants in cars and in buildings is as equally potent, and so reducing those losses and switching out old equipment, making sure that we contain that stuff, has a fairly large potential in regards to what you would be doing. And then additionally, improving the landfill gas capture out at the Short Milton landfill, that could also net some gains as well. As then we jump on into, and I apologize again for the pace of this, we want to make time, sure that you've got time, and then we'll also make sure that we've got more time in a work session. So we look at our consumption-based, and this came from our GAPS memo that we gave to you a bit ago, or in a work session. Roughly, right now, our consumption-based inventory from 2013 says that we're about 2.7 million metric tons when we use a consumption base, which means all the stuff that we bring into our community. And the CRO goal is to get that down to be 750,000 tons by 2030. There's a business as usual increase in the second column from the left, what the full business as usual forecast is for 2030, what the projected decreases are and the reductions based upon our large lever shareholders in the current cap process. And then we would get on into what is needed from a gap from where we're going to end up to where we want to end up based upon the CRO. And so that's roughly 2 million metric tons of CO2 carbon equivalent per year. Here's some of the ways that we can do this, but one of the things that I wanted to identify was that in this consumption-based work, right now, this is leading edge, bleeding edge work, and Eugene's at the forefront of it. DEQ developed a guidebook for, Oregon DEQ just developed a guidebook for reducing consumption-based emissions. It just came out today. I saw a copy of it, so it's like people are just starting to catch up on this. We developed in the CAP project with DEQ, we developed some of this work and we published a community climate action materials management planning guide, a how-to guide for communities based on Eugene, Oregon's experience. And that was actually referenced within the 350, Eugene 350 as one of the plans that we should be pulling from, and we developed it through this process. So consumption-based is very, very difficult. It needs to be done. The council has adopted a very innovative and forward-thinking goal, and we're here to meet that. And we're developing a lot of work to advance that that initiative and that vision. And so here's some of the things that we could be doing. If the Paris Accord was implemented at 25% by 2030, you'd see roughly a large 250,000 tons annually reduced. We start looking at reducing the average square footage of new single-family detached homes. Something that is also on council's discussion is how are we working on housing? So here's another related topic. It's small, but it's as Councilor Zelenka says, the silver buckshot. Move to plant-based diets, and this is scalable from reducing the amount of meat and dairy, and that's you can model it at 10% or model it at 100%, and you start to see that you've got different levels of reductions in our consumption. Reduce possible food waste through a lot of our existing programs. Love Food Not Waste. We've net 50,000 tons. And Eugene optimizes the waste system towards zero waste. And so that's another investments that we could be making, and we'd be able to reduce another 90,000. Other ones that we don't necessarily have numbers on, but we could be doing is reducing the carbon intensity of concrete products from there. Here's an example of our leadership in this area, and we worked with Good Company again to develop that. And then the last piece is it's going to take everybody on the consumption piece. And there's household action. And that's when I like to turn it on over to Mark. And he's going to kind of round us on out for this section.
Thank you, Ethan. Ethan just described for you what phase one of our climate action plan is, the large community scale actions. But there's a whole additional piece where action is needed, the individual behavior change. Over the next few slides, I will highlight the focus of phase two of CAP 2.0. Working with community partners to educate how people in Eugene can limit their personal carbon emissions. We will be developing, or we will be doing additional work on developing a community-wide campaign on information gathered through focus groups with our consultants. So in your household, you can choose to live in a small living space that fits your needs, close to your daily activities. You can donate to and shop at secondhand stores. You can shift spending from high-impact goods to lower-impact services. And when buying new, shop for durability and make sure you maintain your products to maximize longevity. When we're looking at food consumption, substitute plant-based foods for meat and dairy. So shifting from the meat and dairy over to food or plant-based food. Avoid wasting edible food and compost organic materials instead of throwing them away. And Ethan showed you a couple of those scaled numbers. And in transportation, we want to make sure that we're walking, riding our bikes, or taking transit for our daily commute. And if that's not for you, purchase an EV and reduce or offset air travel emissions by purchasing offsets. So finally, I want to look at the CAP 2.0 next steps. Some of you have seen this timeline before. It's on our webpage. You can see that we're at the end of January, and you can see the today mark kind of in the center right of it. And this is adjusted. It's incoming this spring. We're hoping to get the CAP 2.0 draft number 1 complete by March of this year, so about 5 weeks from now. We're going to be doing additional outreach and engagement to community players, including youth. We already have some meetings set up with some high schools. We'll be going out there, and we're going to do specific outreach to other youth community groups. We're open to going to any community event that is willing to have us. So we're going to be working on outreach with them. And I want to highlight take this opportunity to highlight the fact that 350 Eugene has set up a series of town halls, gatherings on different subjects to help educate people on that. And they made a presentation to the Sustainability Commission and was really warmly received there. The equity panel is going to have an additional 11 meetings. The one yesterday went really, really well, and we're really looking forward to those. We'll be doing that between now and June, and we will also be providing additional work sessions on the 2.0 to council to discuss and move forward with actions as necessary. And you can see those red flags up there indicating when we'll be doing that.
Okay, thank you. That was a lot, very quickly, very efficient. Do I have folks that want or need to be in the queue? Anybody? Alan? Take it away. Claire? Go for it.
2 questions. Can you pull up that slide, CRO-related projects? It's a list of like 17 different things that we've done. We've been doing quite a bit on all these different fronts, but we haven't really had a chance to quantify them. Some of these would be easily quantifiable in terms of what they actually accomplish, and others much more difficult to do. Is there a way of starting the process of trying to quantify what those actually mean in terms of our greenhouse gas reductions in terms of metric tons? Some of them you probably already know, but some of them are a lot more difficult to get at.
Councilor Zuleika, yes, there could be, and I think in the energy world, it would be measurement and verification of the work. And I think that one of the challenges that we face is that available funds generally go into program development and implementation. And so if you have, let's say, $100,000, you're going to put most of that on into implementation and maybe little of it on into then the verification and the research. We could do that, definitely. I think it would be a tremendous undertaking in terms of the amount of time and work.
The reason I bring it up is because we often get criticized that we're not doing enough, and we can't say, yes, we are. Here's what we've done, because we don't track it very well. And it's not a problem with Eugene. It's a worldwide problem. It's very difficult to do. It takes a lot of analytical power and horsepower to do it, and we're just not putting enough effort and enough resources into it to actually quantify these things. So it gets difficult to do that. So, but I think we should start thinking about this more in terms of being able to put more resources towards actually quantifying what we're doing so that we can actually demonstrate success when we're doing so many different things. The other thing is that I haven't heard a lot about adaptation. One of the things that was in the original framework of the CRO was that there would be an adaptation part of this plan. Can you describe what's going on? Most of this is around mitigation, which is reduction of greenhouse gases. Adaptation is adapting to the changes that are already baked in, which is going more and more substantial impacts because we're failing to act. And it's going to cost us more and more than it would have, and a heck of a lot more to adapt than it would have been to mitigate. But humans aren't always the smartest creature on the planet. What are we doing in terms of adaptation in this plan?
Yeah, Councilor Zelenka, good question. I would say that for the purposes of this work session, we're really focused in on the GAP strategy, and which is a mitigation approach. But for the overall CAP, or excuse me, the CAP 2.0, mitigation is actually one of the strongest pieces and one of the most robust ways that our partners are engaging. And so a lot of partners look at what their either direct emissions are, which are kind of low, or their ability to affect a system that can reduce emissions. But then when they look at what role they have in mitigation and resiliency, it's very large. And so that is a crucial, I'd say 50% at least, if not more, of the draft document will have a focus on mitigation. One of the really interesting partnerships that we're working on is deeper engagement with Peace Health and healthcare systems in regards to how changing climate impacts other issues that this council deals with in regards to homelessness, human services, and housing. And so it's really a collective impact model that we continue to move forward with this focus on an equitable and livable Eugene as our core value and what people are bringing to the table.
Yeah, two comments and a question. We're doing consumption-based analysis, and all of our goals are based on consumption-based. Nobody else does consumption-based. Consumption-based is a much bigger number, so when we say a percentage of, it's a percentage of a much bigger number. And so keeping that in mind as we move forward. The second one is about refrigeration. Not all greenhouse gases are created equal. There's global warming potential for each different types of gas. For instance, if carbon dioxide is a 1, methane's a 28, nitric oxide is like around 300, and some of these refrigerants are 10 to 20,000 times. So focusing on those, actually you get much, much bigger bang for your buck than you do just focusing on carbon, CO2 reduction, for instance. Question, the 350 folks, and I haven't walked through all of it yet, but they basically get us a document that said there's early actions that we should be taking. Some of them are kind of in what I put in the category of no-brainers, let's do them. Maybe we should start thinking about how is this thinking going on within the CRO 2.0, CAPA 2.0, about early actions versus long-term actions, things we can just be doing that are no-brainers, that create benefit?
I definitely think we can be approaching that and looking in that framework now and later. I would also say that one of the scenarios that's being presented to you would be a more aggressive ramping on up of the implementation of the TSP that we have a lot of control over. So that's a huge area that we collectively are working on.
Yeah, and as Emily said, it's transportation. It's 40% of the greenhouse gases in Oregon. That's where we're going to make the biggest difference. The electric industry is already there, especially with about 85% renewable. So what we're going to focus in on is transportation. Except for Jennifer, who has 2 electric cars.
Everybody has, right.
She gets a
Claire.
pass.
Thank you. So a question on the slide under sector-based gap, page 9 of our handout here. There is projecting that if the state legislature pass a cap and trade legislation as it's looking now, we would see a reduction annually of 430,000 CO2 emissions. And if I am reading the slideshow correctly, you've identified a gap in our sector-based strategy of 450,000. I'm reading that correctly?
Yep.
So
yes, Councilor Schmidt, yeah.
So should the legislature take action in terms of sector-based gap, we would be almost totally towards our own CRO goal on that piece?
Yeah,
potentially?
Potentially, yeah. And so this is how the modeling is done and how it would be implemented. But by 2030, if they implemented something now, it would be up and running within 5 years, and then you would have all, allotments and the system up and running by 2030 and having those impacts and those investments made. So this is, once again, the bill hasn't been, it's going to get released tomorrow, and once it gets finalized, then we'll see what's actually lives in it by the time it gets through the legislative process.
Certainly, I recognize that. And that would still leave our consumption gap, though.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we are at time, so if anyone has a burning question, we can extend for a couple minutes. Otherwise, yes.
The one last thing I would say is that I'd like to give you, before you leave, there's another document here. This is the tablespoon.
Perfect.
And so that you can take this and noodle on it, reach out to us, and then we're going to work to figure out a follow-up to come back to dig deeper into this, because we know that there's just for that. And once again, we apologize for the compressed nature and a lot of information.
Actually, I think you're to be commended for what you've packed in to this 90-minute session, and we know it's an iterative process. We're just taking a step at a time, so thank you very much for that, and we are adjourned.